So Into the Night is another crime thriller featuring Detective Gemma Woodstock. I think similarly to The Dark Lake, it's a mix of police procedural and character story. So there's a crime to be solved, a murder, two actually, and Gemma is put on 2 cases in this book, but at the same time as she's grappling with that professional challenge and working her way through the case, she's also dealing with quite a few personal story arcs. You know, I don't know where ideas come from. I think about it a lot. They sort of just tend to come to me when I'm doing things like driving or, you know, walking or whatever. But I do remember reading an article about a film set incident and how the witness accounts were really different. So everyone was there at this accident that had happened on a film set, but everyone seemed to have a different version of the actual event. And I just thought that would be a really interesting premise for a crime. So in the story, a murder takes place on a film set, and I think the seed of that confusion and just the sort of the intrigue of having a really public crime actually filmed and caught on camera would be just an interesting kind of police challenge. So that's sort of I think where that was born from originally. So Gemma continues to be a complicated character. I think it's fair to say that a lot has changed for her in the second book. So in Into the Night, it's set about 2.5 years later from following The Dark Lake. She's moved from her hometown of Smithson and is living in Melbourne. So that is a huge change for her. She's left her son with her ex, which is another pretty big life change. And she's obviously met a whole new cast of people in her workplace and is dealing, I think, just with almost the teenage years that she never had, but in her early 30s. So she's definitely still lost and conflicted, but I think she's on a path toward perhaps a little bit more of stability. I moved the setting of the book this time because I wanted Gemma to be in a place that was really unfamiliar to her. I sort of felt like the oppressiveness of the small town had gotten to her so much in the first book that it was realistic that she would leave. Obviously having a child made that really difficult, but then I liked that layer to her character too. I know there's a lot of discussion in society about women leaving their children, and it's always frowned upon, and I have no doubt it will be in this instance as well, but I think that it's something that's realistic to her character, and it doesn't, in my view, make her a bad mother. It just makes her a human that's challenged by lots of things. But the setting of Melbourne, I think in contrast to Smithson, I loved writing that. I thought the kind of the grittiness and the darkness added an extra kind of layer of intrigue, and it sort of matched where she was emotionally. So I liked the contrast. And then she does have a visit home in the book, which I think is another way to show her new world versus her old world and how she grapples with that herself. Do you know, I actually didn't at all. I saw it as a completely finished story, but the second that the draft was done, I actually had little thoughts around what might happen next that were really bugging me. And then I just had the most fortunate situation when Alan and Unwin said, do you want to write a sequel? So I'd started to plan out what might happen in a second book, but when I was actually writing it, I did see it as kind of a complete story. Yeah, so with The Dark Lake, I sort of had the idea really clearly in my mind and the character of Gemma really clearly, the premise, the death, I guess, the murder. But I actually had a sort of a lightning bolt moment about a month into writing it where I sort of figured it all out. And I actually can remember sort of what I was doing and where I was, and I went, oh my gosh, that's it, that's how it all resolves, which was great. So that, I think I don't always plan out the way the books are going to end. That one was very much a sort of a step process. With Into the Night, I definitely planned out the whole thing, and I knew who the suspects were and who I felt like the most viable criminal was. But things change as you go along, and the motivations and whatever are quite nuanced, and so they obviously evolve as the characters do too. I definitely think Gemma's story will continue. I've kind of got a very rough idea of what might happen with her and her world next. And whether or not she stays in Melbourne, we'll have to see. But yeah, I think she's an interesting character, and I think she's on a journey, and I'd really like to keep seeing where that goes.